The US, Ukraine, and Russia have all sent delegations to Saudi Arabia to discuss a potential peace deal. But with both sides far apart on key issues, the road ahead looks quite challenging. On Sunday night, United States and Ukrainian officials met in Saudi Arabia for what they called, and I quote, productive and focused talks on de-escalating the ongoing war. The White House is reportedly pushing for a broader ceasefire by April 20, which coincides with Easter for Western and Orthodox Christmas. However, Moscow and Kyiv remains miles away in their demands, making it uncertain whether a deal can be reached anytime soon or not. According to Complexity, the US and Russia are holding separate discussions, with Russian officials scheduled to meet their American counterparts on Monday. This marks the first time since the early weeks of the war that parallel negotiations of this nature have been in place, raising hopes that shuttle diplomacy might bridge the gap between the warring nations. Ukraine, led by their defense minister in these talks, is pushing for a broader ceasefire that will include protections for energy facilities, infrastructure, and naval zones. In an evening address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky did not mince words, stating, and I quote, Russia is the only one dragging this war out. He further emphasized that the world needs to apply more pressure on Russia to force them into a full ceasefire. Zelensky also took to social media urging allies to impose fresh sanctions and diplomatic pressures on Moscow. Kiev is firm in its stance that only a complete halt to Russian military operations can bring lasting peace. What's Russia saying? The Kremlin, on the other hand, remains skeptical of any broad ceasefire agreement. Russian President Vladimir Putin has outright rejected the idea of 30-day full truce, instead proposing a more limited halt, one that applies to attack on energy infrastructure, one that is in effect at this point of time. Kremlin spokesperson warned that negotiations would be tough, stating, and I quote, we are only at the beginning of this path, and many outstanding questions remain. Russia also has a key interest in reopening the Black Sea Grain Deal, a 2022 agreement that allowed Ukrainian agricultural exports to pass through the region safely. Moscow pulled out of this deal in 2023, citing Western sanctions that hindered its own agricultural trade. Now it appears that one of Russia's main goals is to come up with the negotiated terms that would benefit its economic interests. Despite the high-level negotiations, fighting on the ground has not stopped. Just before the discussions in Saudi Arabia, both Russia and Ukraine launched fresh drone attacks. Ukraine reported that a Russian drone strike killed 3 civilians in Kyiv, which is a big thing, while Russia claimed to have spotted nearly 60 Ukrainian drones and shot them down overnight. A man was reportedly killed in Russia due to falling drone debris, and another civilian was also killed in another border area. Additionally, Ukraine announced a rare battlefield success, capturing a small town in eastern Luhansk region, an indication that hostilities remain despite high diplomatic pressures. Now the question is, what's next? While the US envoy expressed optimism about a potential ceasefire, the Kremlin remains cautious. If anything, these talks could be a first step in a long and difficult negotiation process. The question is, will the US be able to broker a deal that satisfies both Russia and Ukraine, or will these talks go to the way of previous diplomatic efforts, ending in more of a deadlock? Let's wait and watch.